Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're pulling a dossier that, honestly, sounds like it belongs in the Marvel Universe.
It really does.
We are looking at a man who carried a nickname you usually associate with, radioactive bites and spandex suits.
The Spider-Man. But in the context of Indian scientific history, this is a very, very real figure. And no, he wasn't fighting crime in Queens.
We're talking about Dr. Benoy Krishna Tikader. And to set the stage, we're looking at a pretty specific slice of time here, the early 1980s.
Right, from 1981 to 1986. That's when he was the director of the Zoological Survey of India, or the ZSI.
And the reason this deep dive is so fascinating to me is because it's a story about scale.
It really is. It's about how looking at the tiniest, most ignored things in the world can actually prepare you to solve these massive national level problems.
That's the hook.
Yeah.
Because when you look at his career, it just doesn't make linear sense. You have a guy who spent decades obsessing over eight-legged invertebrates.
Creatures that, let's be honest, most people just want to get rid of.
Exactly. And somehow, that specific obsession leads him to advising prime ministers and saving ancient rainforests.
So there's a paradox, isn't it? How do you go from the micro world of a spider's web to the macro world of environmental policy?
That's the mission today. We want to trace that arc. So let's start where all good hero stories do. The origin.
The origin story.
I'm assuming Dr. Tikader didn't get bitten by anything radioactive.
No radioactive spiders, but the bug for nature, if you'll forgive the pun, it bit him very early on. The records describe him as a born naturalist.
The kind of kid who's always in the garden, turning over rocks, collecting butterflies.
The kid bringing things home in his pockets that make his parents scream.
Exactly. So that curiosity was always there.
It was. But the pivotal moment comes in 1956. He joins the Zoological Survey of India as an assistant zoologist. Now, you have to understand, in the 1950s, if you wanted to make a name for yourself in zoology, there was a hierarchy.
Oh, for sure. The charismatic megafauna. Everyone wants to study the tigers, the elephants, the stuff that looks good on a stamp.
Precisely. That's the glamour work. But Tikader, he looked at what everyone else was doing, and he went in the complete opposite direction. He chose arachnology.
Spiders and scorpions. Why? I mean, was he just trying to be different?
The source material gives us a really interesting window into his thinking here. He chose them because he felt the group was neglected.
Neglected.
Yes. He saw that while everyone was looking at the big mammals, this massive, complex world of arachnids was basically a black hole in Indian science. He said they were rich in interesting problems.
I love that phrase, interesting problems. It suggests he saw complexity where other people just saw, a pest.
That's the key to his whole character. He saw value where others didn't, and because so few people were studying them, the field was just wide open for discovery.
But this wasn't easy work, right? We're not talking about looking at photos on a server.
No, we're talking about massive, physically demanding field work. He launched these extensive forays across incredibly diverse ecosystems, trekking through jungles, climbing into canopies.
So he was literally filling in the blank spots on the biological map of India.
He was, and he became the undisputed authority. I mean, this was not a hobby. He earned both his PhD and a Doctor of Science degree, a DSc, specifically for his outstanding researches on spiders.
That is a lot of academic firepower for something so small.
It is, and he turned that research into what is, essentially the Bible for the field. He wrote 2 huge volumes on spiders and 1 on scorpions for the prestigious Fauna of India series.
So if you were a student in India in the 70s or 80s and you found a spider, you could not avoid his name.
All roads led to Tikader. He even put Indian arachnology on the global map. He was the India correspondent for CETA in Paris.
Okay, so that establishes the Spider-Man nickname. He's the guy. He's the specialist. But then the story shifts in a way I just didn't expect. It's 1981. He becomes the director of the entire ZSI.
The top job. So now he's responsible for everything, not just the eight-legged stuff.
And usually when a specialist gets an administrative role like that, they either get buried in paperwork or they just keep doing their own research. But Tikader walks right into a massive environmental crisis.
The Silent Valley.
This is a legendary moment in Indian environmental history. But for anyone listening who might not know, what was happening in Silent Valley in the early 80s?
So Silent Valley is this pristine tropical rainforest in Kerala, just a glorious, distinct tract of biodiversity. But there was a proposal to build a hydroelectric project, a Hydel project.
Which means damming the river.
And submerging the forest, basically destroying the ecosystem. Now, there was a lot of protest at the time, activists, emotional outcry.
But emotion doesn't stop a government project.
It doesn't, not on its own. And this is where we see his leadership style. The notes talk about his remarkable zeal and boldness.
Boldness is an interesting word. It implies there was, pressure to back down?
Oh, huge pressure. The development lobby was strong, and, energy needs real. It's a classic conflict. But the documents say he refused to shrink back.
So where other people might have just stayed quiet.
He pushed forward. He ordered an intensive survey of Silent Valley. He sent the ZSI cavalry in.
To do what exactly? Just count the animals?
To assess the faunal resources. And that language is so important. Resources. He reframed the animals. They aren't just bugs and birds. They're a national asset, just like coal or gold.
That is a brilliant strategic shift.
It is. He helped establish the scientific argument that Silent Valley was a unique gene pool reserve. The argument became, if you flood this, you are deleting genetic data we might never get back.
You're destroying a library before you've even read the books.
Exactly. And that shifted the ZSI from just being a group of explorers to an organization capable of high-level advocacy.
And it worked. The project was eventually scrapped.
It was, but the amazing thing is he didn't stop there. He realized this wasn't a one-off problem. He applied that same data-first rigor to other threatened areas.
Right, I saw mention of the Neora Valley.
Yes, in the eastern Himalayas. Also threatened by a Hydel project. He sent the teams in. And then there's the Namdapha Wildlife Sanctuary on the Indo-Burmese frontier.
That one sounds particularly intense. The notes say it was incredibly difficult to access.
It is. It's often called the largest surviving chunk of undisturbed rainforest in the subcontinent. Rugged, remote, dangerous. But Tikader's view was that obstacles exist to be overcome. He pushed the ZSI to map its ecological zones from scratch.
It's fascinating. The discipline he learned from studying spiders, that extreme attention to detail, it translated into saving these huge landscapes.
It makes a kind of sense, doesn't it? When you study the small things, you realize how interconnected everything is. You can't just save the tiger, you have to save the whole web.
Which brings us to his philosophy. Because even with these big political battles, he never lost that Spider-Man perspective, did he? He championed the underdogs.
That is the core of his conservation philosophy. He believed the magnificent wealth of wildlife included everything, not just the big charismatic species.
The struggling species, as he put it.
Yes. And this all culminated in a landmark book he published in 1983, Threatened Animals of India.
And this wasn't just some obscure academic paper.
No, not at all. This was a major national release. It was formally released by the Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi. That shows you the level of political buy-in he managed to get.
He got the highest office in the land to pay attention to biodiversity. So what kind of animals was he highlighting? Who were the strugglers?
Well, it covered the big-ticket items like the tiger, you have to. But true to his nature, he focused heavily on animals that usually get ignored. Primates like the lion-tailed macaque, the Nilgiri langur, the lesser cats of eastern India.
And I'm guessing some reptiles.
Oh, absolutely. He's shown a spotlight on Indian testudines, turtles, and tortoises. And lizards. He was making a very clear point. Biodiversity isn't just about the animals that look good on a calendar.
Although, speaking of calendars...
I was waiting for this, yes. There's a great detail in the files about a brilliant marketing move he made.
The calendar, it's so clever.
So, in 1983, Tikader realized that people on the mainland had almost zero concept of what lived on the Andaman and Nicobar Islands.
Which makes sense. To most people, it was just dots on a map in the Bay of Bengal.
Right. But Tikader saw it as a fragile island ecosystem, a veritable gene pool reserve. And he knew if people didn't know these creatures existed, they wouldn't care if they went extinct. So he inspired the ZSI to produce a magnificent calendar.
Featuring the birds of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. It seems so simple, but it's actually really savvy public relations.
It is. It's visual. It hangs on your wall. You look at it every day. He was bringing the struggling species into people's living rooms. He also authored books on the islands and helps establish a ZSI station right there in Port Blair.
He wanted boots on the ground.
Or, I guess, flip-flops on the sand. But yes, he wanted scientists living in the ecosystem they were studying.
So we've got the explorer, the advocate, the PR guy. But there's one more layer to his legacy that I think is the most overlooked, but maybe the most important for the future of science.
The administrative side, modernizing the cabinet of curiosities.
It sounds dry, but this is what separates a hoarder from a museum, right?
That's a perfect way to put it. The ZSI had millions of specimens, but if you can't find what you need, it's useless. And one of his biggest moves was regarding the type specimens.
Okay, we need to define this because it's super important in biology. What is a type specimen?
It's the holy grail of taxonomy. When a scientist discovers a new species, they have to designate one specific physical specimen as the type. That single jar, that one-pin insect, is the reference point for that species for all eternity.
Oh, so it's like the standard kilogram weight in Paris. If I find a scorpion 100 years from now, I have to compare it to that one original type.
Exactly. It's the gold standard. If you lose the type, you lose the scientific definition of the species. And Tikader realized these were too valuable to be just mixed in with everything else. He ordered that all primary types be systematically segregated.
So he built a high-security vault for India's most valuable genetic data.
That's a great analogy. But he didn't stop at physical organization. He saw the digital wave coming way before most of his peers.
The data bank.
Yes. Remember, this is the early 80s. Computers in India were not common, but he initiated the computerization of the national zoological collections. He wanted to move from these dusty, handwritten ledgers to a computerized data bank.
His goal was ready reference.
Quicker retrieval. He understood that data that takes 6 months to find is useless in an emergency like saving Silent Valley. The data had to be actionable.
And he knew he couldn't do this alone. He looked outside India for help, didn't he?
He did. In 1984, he organized the first international workshop on management of zoological collections, and he partnered with a heavy hitter, the Carnegie Museum of Natural History from the U.S.
That's a big deal, bringing Pittsburgh to Calcutta.
It was. They brought in experts from 14 different countries, and the focus was very specific. Recent mammals in tropical environments.
Why that distinction? Why tropical?
Because storing a specimen in London is relatively easy. It's cool, it's dry. Storing things in India, it's a nightmare. You have heat, massive humidity, mold, insects trying to eat the specimens.
So standard European museum rules just don't apply?
Not at all. If you just leave things on a shelf in Calcutta, they will rot. Tikader knew they needed specialized techniques. This workshop brought those international standards to the ZSI.
And while he's doing all this, he's also literally building the place up.
Literally. During his tenure, the new 10-story headquarters in Calcutta finally reached its 8th story. He was building the physical infrastructure to house these growing collections.
It's an exhausting list of achievements. He seems to have balanced two very different skill sets. On one hand, the muddy boots biologist looking for spiders.
And on the other, the CEO building skyscrapers and databases. The sources call him a versatile zoologist, and I think that's perfect. He combined deep scientific talent with a prodigious capacity for administration. That's a rare combination.
So, as we close the file on Dr. Tikader, the Spider-Man, what's the big takeaway here? What's his lasting impact?
I think it comes down to the concept of the biological baseline.
Unpack that for us.
You cannot save what you haven't documented. Whether it was the spiders he first described, the survey of Silent Valley, or those computerized records, his entire career was about establishing the baseline data.
It's the difference between saying, I think this forest is pretty, and saying, here is a list of 500 unique species that live nowhere else on Earth.
Exactly. He proved that modern conservation isn't just about emotion. It's about rigorous, accessible documentation. That shift from just exploration to evidence-based advocacy is what saved places like Silent Valley.
And it all started with a boy collecting moths and a young scientist choosing the path less traveled.
Choosing the neglected path.
I think that's what stays with me. It's a reminder that looking closely at the small things, the things other people ignore, well, that can actually train you to tackle the biggest problems imaginable.
It teaches you discipline. The discipline required to count the eyes on a spider is the same discipline needed to stand up to a hydroelectric dam lobby.
So the next time you see a spider in the corner of your room, or a struggling creature that doesn't look like a panda bear, maybe take a closer look.
Don't reach for the shoe. You never know where that curiosity might lead.
It might just lead to saving a rainforest. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the legacy of Dr. Benoy Krishna Tikader.
Keep exploring.